Okay, so I'm going to do a share screen for you guys because I have all of my training paperwork in here. So you are actually in the listing present, or it's not a listing presentation class. We're actually going to be going over the listing agreement. So let's take a look at this and see what documents you're actually going to need. So if you are going to be going on a listing presentation, hopefully you've already practiced your listing presentation and you have all of that mastered, because being at the listing presentation itself is not the time that you want to start working on your listing presentation. You want to have already got that taken care of. So you've already done the market analysis for the homeowner, and now it's simply just time to fill out the contract. So what documents do you need to take with you in order to do that? So going on a listing appointment, as far as documentation, is fairly easy. You need a listing contract. So that is the agreement between you and the seller that outlines all the terms of how you get paid for selling their property. And then you will either need to take property disclosures. If they live in the property and they have actual knowledge about the property, you'll take property disclosures. If they do not live in the property and they have no actual knowledge of any defects, they can fill out a disclaimer. I always warn my sellers, be careful with the disclosure or disclaimer you fill out. The more information that you can give to a prospective buyer, the less chances that you find yourself in court at a later time. So you will also need a seller net sheet. So this is the calculation of cost for a seller of what it's going to cost them to sell their property. So not just the real estate commission. What are the title fees? What are any other fees that might be associated with selling their property? Payoff of their mortgage, so on and so forth. I don't have a preference if you want to use the manual paper net sheets, or if you want to use one of the title company apps, as long as you tell them at the listing presentation what their potential proceeds, or in some cases, how much they're going to need to bring to closing in order to sell their property. So now, just a little caveat to this. If you happen to be listing a condo, there is a condo addendum to the listing agreement or the lease agreement. It outlines what does the condo association fee pay for, and then are there any designated parking spots that may be associated with that condo, is what that form is going to be. So pretty simple. This is your checklist on going on a listing presentation. Okay, so let's get started with the listing contract itself. So I'm getting into this. Now, I want to point out a couple of things on this listing agreement. So first of all, if you look across the top, it says Oklahoma Real Estate Commission. We will be using the Oklahoma Real Estate Commission listing agreement for the Keller Williams Molyneux office. Now, the reason that I say that is because there are several listing agreements floating around out there. Every MLS creates their own listing agreement, and they can be used as a binding contract between you and the seller. You just need to make sure that you understand what it says. My preference for this office is the real estate commission listing agreement. So now you'll notice underneath the Oklahoma Real Estate Commission, it says this is a legally binding contract. If you do not understand, seek the advice of an attorney. So unless you also, in connection with holding your real estate license, also are an attorney, do not give them legal advice on contracts. If you're ever asked, can I be sued for this? Is this legal to do this? Well, I don't know the answer to that. If you have concerns about that, you need to contact an attorney. That's your standard script. All right, we're going to get started on this part now. In the top of this, in consideration of the services rendered, the undersigned broker and the seller hereby exclusively list with the broker. Now let's talk about that for just a moment. They're listing, the word broker gets thrown around quite a bit because it says the undersigned licensed broker. That's you as a real estate agent working for Keller Williams, but you are hereby exclusively listing the property with the broker. So the broker means the brokerage. The brokerage that you work for actually owns the listing agreement that you're about to sign on behalf of Keller Williams. So your name will appear at the bottom. You do not need to send that to me as the managing broker to sign any listing agreement because you have the authority to do that. The next line that you're going to see is the actual physical property address. So if you're taking a listing, this will be the address that you see typically on the tax record. Sometimes you'll want to check that. An example of that, 123 Main Street, Norman, 73069, zip code. So your listing agreement must contain a legal description. So if you go to the tax records, because here on this line it says, get the information from the tax records. You go to the tax records and the listing description is too long for you to fit on these two lines. You can, as an alternate, write see attached supplement because your supplements add to contracts, and you can make it an additional page with your listing agreement if it's too long. You will sometimes see that with rural property that the legal descriptions are pretty extensive. Okay, your seller needs to understand when they list this property, all fixtures and improvements will go with it. So fixtures, anything that's attached. So I do want you to pause for a moment and explain that to your sellers and start having conversations around the things that are physically attached to their home that they may not think about as needing to stay. So for example, as we get into our listing agreement, it's going to tell you that all curtains and curtain rods need to stay. Does the seller want to take their curtains and curtain rods, or are they okay with leaving them there? Because then we're going to get into reserved items if they want to take them. Things that will pop up in the future. You need to make sure you're addressing things like Ring doorbells. Do they want to take their Ring doorbell with them? They need to be planning on replacing that Ring doorbell if they do, preferably before they put it on the market. I know they don't like to do that, but that saves a lot of hassle for you once you get it under contract. Other things, the brackets for their flat screen TVs. Any TVs that they may have installed in an outdoor patio area, any sunscreen type things that they may have installed in an outdoor patio area, children's play equipment, hot tubs, if it's not obviously obvious that they're staying in hardwired in, above ground pools. So talk about all of those things up front, and then there's no errors later or misunderstandings. So now you will be listing this with all the mineral rights that are owned by the seller. So mineral rights will transfer to the new buyer unless this current seller specifically reserves them in the contract. So again, pause for a moment, have a conversation about mineral rights. If your seller doesn't know if they own mineral rights, so they can still reserve them if they own them. Okay. I don't know if I own my mineral rights, but if I have them, I want to keep them. You can go ahead and reserve. So at the end of the day, when the property transfers, if the current owners never owned the mineral rights in the first place, they just won't have any mineral rights when they sell. Not a big deal. Okay. So as we read on in this initial paragraph, it says that they are granting the broker the exclusive right to sell the property at a price of, and you have a blank. So this is going to be your first blank on this contract. Your list price needs to be agreed to by the seller. This is the conversation you were having previously before you filled out the listing agreement. So you've done your market analysis. What are we going to put it on the market for? There's where you put it here. So now this listing agreement is going to be subject to all of the following. So let's take a look at paragraph 1. So as you read through paragraph 1, it tells the seller, by appointing this broker as your exclusive broker, the seller is agreeing to work through the broker for the sale, option, or exchange of the property, and they will refer to the broker all inquiries received in any form from anyone else. And it lists several different sources that you might be getting offers from. So take a look at the last sentence on this. The In addition, any compensation which is conditioned upon the sale of this property will be earned by the broker as set forth herein without any discount or allowance for any efforts made by the seller or a representative of the seller in connection with the sale of this property. So let me put this in layman's terms for you when you're explaining this to your seller. You are hereby exclusively listing your property with Keller Williams. So if your friends, neighbors, someone from church approaches you about information on purchasing your home or expresses interest in purchasing your home, you need to send them to me because you will not get a discount in commission for finding your own buyer. Let me go to work for you. And that's simply how you're going to paraphrase paragraph 1. Okay, as we get to paragraph 2, this agreement, all contracts need to have a start date and they need to have an end date. So your first blank is going to be, what date do you want to start this listing agreement on? Now you'll notice that I have on the blank date of appointment. But what if you get to that appointment and they need to do some work to the house? It's not quite ready to put on the market. So maybe they want to paint some things, or they want to, replace some flooring, or they need to get some landscaping taken care of. And maybe they're about 2 weeks out. Go ahead and put the start date of this contract as the date of your appointment, because you don't want to give the seller the ability to list their property with someone else that they run into who may be offering a services such as a discounted commission. So get them locked down on the listing agreement today. Now, your expiration date can be as far out in the future as you want it to be. It can be 3 months, it can be 6 months, it can be a year, it can be 2 years, whatever you and the seller agree to as an appropriate amount of time. Now, your listing agreement with the seller will expire at midnight on whatever date you write here. So if I take this listing and it starts on January the 1st and I have an expiration date of June 30th, I have until midnight of June 30th to get that property sold. On July the 1st, they wake up, they are going to be able to relist that property with anyone they choose. Okay, let's get down to paragraph 3. Paragraph 3 is all about how you're going to get paid. So that's pretty important. So on paragraph 3, the seller is going to agree to pay a commission that is equal to or greater than, try that again, pay a commission equal to the greater of, and then whatever amount you write in here. Now keep in mind, commission is always negotiable between you and the seller. It is my suggestion that you put 6%, but there will be some instances where that number could be lower, but there will also be instances where that number may be higher. So if you're doing additional things for the seller that above and beyond what would normally happen in a listing agreement, you may choose to charge them more commission based on those actions. Okay. The commission will be based on the total sales price, not the list price, but whatever price the property sells at. Now, this next blank that you have an opportunity to fill something in on is for a transaction fee. Our office doesn't actually charge transaction fees because RESPA does not like them. And transaction fees can only be charged if you're charging a transaction fee 100% of the time to every seller that comes down the pike. So if you're giving mom or dad or a family member a pass on a transaction fee, don't charge them. You're going to get yourself in trouble. Now, occasionally it may not be in the seller's best interest to do a percentage amount. You may want to charge them a flat rate for selling their property. So for instance, if the sale price of the property is going to be fairly low and the percentage amount may not be enough incentive for another real estate agent to want to bring you a buyer. So you may want to charge a flat rate. That way you have more opportunity to put the commission at a higher rate on the MLS. So either one, you cannot charge both. It's either going to be a percentage or you charge a flat rate. That's why the word "or" is in all caps. Now, the seller is agreeing to pay you that amount. When have you earned your commission? The biggest misconception is that you earn your commission the day the property closes. That is not true. You earn your commission when we talk about one of the next four things. You get paid the commission at the time of closing. So let's look at when you have actually earned it. On 3A, the sale or exchange of the property during the term of this agreement, which whether procured by the broker, the seller, or a third person. So once that property is actually sold, which means you have an executed contract on it, then you have eventually earned your commission. Occasionally we get to 3B and you have shown the potential buyers the property or you've given them information. We just couldn't get it under contract before the expiration of your listing contract. In the event that happens, you're going to want to write, you have to do this up front, you're going to need to write a time frame here on this blank. Let's read through this. If the sale or exchange of the property happens within X number of days after the termination of this agreement, which essentially means it expired, with anyone to whom the broker has shown the property, or if the broker has negotiated concerning the property prior to the termination of this agreement. So somebody brings an offer, let's say our listing expires on June the 30th. We got an offer on June 29th and we just did not get it worked out before the property expired, but the sellers decided to accept the buyer's offer on July the 1st. The seller would still owe you a real estate commission if you have a number of days written in here. If you have that number as 0, they will pay you nothing. Now, I have on here typically 30 to 90 days. You can make that as long as you want it. I've seen people put 120 days in, completely up to you. It's your business. Now, there is a caveat to this paragraph. So if you have been negotiating with a buyer, as I mentioned before, June 29th, your contract with this current seller expires on June 30th. They wake up on July the 1st and decide to accept this offer. You will not be paid if the last sentence has happened, provided that this clause will not apply if the seller relists the property at the termination of this agreement with another licensed real estate broker. So let's say on July the 1st, our contract has expired and they call ABC Realty and they contract with them in another listing agreement and the same buyer comes back to buy this property. Unfortunately, you will not be paid at that point. Okay. Occasionally, this doesn't happen very often, but it has happened or it wouldn't be part of our contracts. So let's take a look at paragraph 3C. If the broker procures a buyer who is ready, willing, and able to purchase the property at the price and terms set forth herein, or at any other price and terms that are acceptable to the seller. So let's talk about that. We list the property. Let's say we list a property for $150,000, and a buyer comes forth and says, "I will pay you $150,000." At that point, that's just an offer, and you have not earned your commission. But when you present that offer to the seller and the seller says, "Yes, I will accept that offer," and they physically sign the executed purchase agreement, that is the point where you have earned your commission. They hired you to find a buyer who was ready, willing, and able to purchase, and you did that, and they have accepted an offer. Commission earned. Now remember, commission's not paid until it closes. When you get to paragraph 3D, this paragraph will only apply if there is a tenant living in the property. It's very similar to paragraph B, but when we get down to D for dog, if you sell the sale or exchange of this property or after the term of this agreement to a party who is renting or leasing during the term of this agreement. So if they end up selling this property to a tenant, and you have days written in there. So if they sell it to their tenant 30 days after your listing expires, they will still be on the hook for paying real estate commission. If there is not a tenant in the property, you can feel free to fill in that blank with not applicable, NA. Okay, let's get down to paragraph 4. Now, everybody is all excited once the buyers and the sellers have agreed upon a purchase contract. So what is the obligation of the seller at that point once they enter into a contract with the buyer? So for 4A, this entire paragraph discusses the earnest money. The seller understands that once they enter into an agreement with the buyer, the broker is going to receive and hold the earnest money deposit. So we won't read that entire paragraph because that's essentially what it's going to tell you. You will not be giving the security or the earnest money deposit to the seller directly. First of all, it's not their money. It still belongs to the buyer and it will be returned to the buyer once they complete the sale of this property. So let's go down to 4B. These are some things that the seller is agreeing to do prior to the close date. So, and it will be at the seller's expense. So let's talk about what is the seller agreeing to pay for at this point. They are going to furnish the buyers with what's known as a Uniform Commercial Code Search Certificate. What is a Uniform Commercial Code Certificate? Also known as a UCC certificate. So that is a search that the title company will do for things that may be associated with the property that could result in a lien. And typically that's going to be for materials that are attached to the house. So if they had installed siding on the property and they financed it and the current owner stopped making the payment on the siding, this could result in a lien on the property. Sometimes you will see that with air conditioner units. Sometimes you will see that with Culligan water softeners. So if the current owners have financed something that's attached to the property, it's a search that they do to make sure that those obligations are paid off at closing. So they're agreeing to do that. What else is the seller agreeing to do? If we come to about mid-paragraph here, seller at seller's expense will also furnish an abstract of title certified to date showing marketable title. So in a nutshell, to summarize that and put it in layman's terms, the seller is responsible for bringing the abstract up to date for the buyer. Now, if you're selling a condo, it also goes down to talk about if the property is a condominium, then you will supply a declaration of unit ownership bylaws to the prospective buyer, which just means you need to give them the covenants, codes, and restrictions so they know what is going to be covered by the condo association. So your contract also states in the last paragraph, if required by the lender, a mortgage inspection certificate or inspection report will be prepared by a licensed surveyor and within 180 days before close. Now, I will tell you that that is no longer a seller expense. So just you may want to let your sellers know that that is a buyer expense now because it's ordered by the lender, and on our purchase contracts, it specifically says that that is a buyer expense. So no worries on that one.
So the mortgage inspection report is now a buyer's expense?
Correct.
Okay.
And on the purchase agreement, it specifically says that on the purchase agreement that they will enter into with the buyer. So okay. Now I do pause for a moment. That's why I have this little yellow that says check this. Paragraph 4C, I do look for any indication that this may not be accurate. I read this out loud to them. Seller has sole ownership and full authority to sell the property. Stop and take a look at your seller's face. If anything is hesitant, if they look like they're thinking about that, you need to ask some questions around that. You do not want to find out at closing that they've got a sibling who is also on title or an ex spouse who needs to sign off on the sale of this property. So check all of those things up front. Remember, you're trying to clear hurdles out of your path. Now, as we get into 4D, so the seller needs to understand in 4D that they are going to be responsible for all ad valorem taxes through the day of close. So prorated through the date of closing. Ad valorem taxes are a very fancy way to say property taxes, property tax. So if your seller is living there and they're selling the property closing on June the 30th, they will be responsible from January the 1st through June 30th because taxes are paid on that property in December. So they will be giving the buyer a credit for the property taxes for the amount of time that they lived in the property. Now, if this is an investment property, or if there are tenants in the property, and the property is closing maybe in mid-month, this word rent, if the tenant pays rent on June 1st, and you're closing on June the 15th, the new owner should inherit the end of the month's rent. So there would be potentially a 15-day prorated rent that would need to transfer to the new owners because the current owner collected a full month's rent and they only owned it for the first half of it. Now, also any security deposits will also transfer to the new buyer at closing. Okay, now I will tell you that paragraph E and F is a little bit out of date. I don't talk about this, or I let the sellers know we're really not going to cover paragraphs E and F because both of these items will be covered in the purchase agreement that you agreed to with the buyer. But I will tell you guys what this means. In paragraph E, it talks about the fact that if FHA or VA does not allow the buyer to pay a certain item, for example, the tax fee, that some lenders will charge, then the seller agrees to pay that. We don't need to address that in a listing contract because that's always addressed on the purchase contract. They're going to know that they will be paying that fee when they accept a purchase contract from an FHA or a VA buyer. Now, the paragraph F also addresses the fact that in the event they are using FHA or VA and an appraiser calls out a repair on the plumbing, heating, cooling, ducts, electric, and then you could kind of see the ongoing list that the seller agrees to have those repaired. Again, all of that information is going to be addressed on a purchase contract. So there's really no need to have that conversation with your sellers up front. Okay, let's take a look at paragraph 5. Now, paragraph 5 deals with property disclosures. It is a state law that all sellers complete a property disclosure, whether they're using a real estate agent, they're selling their house on their own. So the reason that a seller wants to complete a property disclosure is because it protects them in a court of law. Anything that they disclose to a buyer prior to them entering into a sale cannot be sued for in a court of law later. So disclose, disclose, disclose. So paragraph 5A just says that the seller is going to complete property disclosures. Now remember, if they live in the property and they have actual knowledge of any defects, it's best for them to fill out the 3-page disclosure. If they own the property, they have never lived in the property, and they have no knowledge of any defect, then they can use a disclaimer. Typically, you'll see a disclaimer used if somebody has inherited the property or purchased it maybe at a sheriff's sale and they're turning around and selling it again and they don't know anything about it. They could use a disclaimer. Now, what's your obligation as a real estate agent? In paragraph B, it says, broker is going to provide a copy of whatever it is that the seller filled out, whether that be disclosures or disclaimers, to all potential buyers. Now, we'll tell you that you cannot complete your upload into the MLS for your listing without also uploading the disclosures the seller completed. The MLS will not allow you to make that listing live until those disclosures are uploaded. So that's kind of a little built-in safety feature. Now, paragraph C talks about what happens if you, as the licensee, know about a defect and the seller doesn't say anything about it on their disclosures, and they don't have any other attachments letting the buyer know that there are other defects with the property. So your obligation as a real estate agent is you will disclose to a potential purchaser any defects in that property that are actually known by the broker, which were not included in the seller's disclosures. So if you know that there's a water leak somewhere and the seller fails to disclose that, you're required by law to make sure that you tell the buyer about that defect. Now, if the property is built before 1978, paragraph 6 is going to come into play. If the property was built after 1978, you can skip over paragraph 6. And so paragraph 6 directly deals with lead-based paint disclosures. And it simply says you've got a house that was built before 1978. You're going to complete the lead-based paint disclosure. And I, as the real estate agent, am going to make sure that the buyers see it and sign it. So not only am I going to let them see it and sign it, but I'm going to give them this pamphlet of protecting their family from lead-based paint, if I represent them. Okay, let's get down to number 7. In paragraph 7, in a nutshell, it says all of this information is provided to the broker and is true, and seller agrees to hold the broker or their associates harmless of any cost, expense, or damage due to information that they didn't tell me. So I cannot disclose to potential buyers or other real estate agents information that I don't have. So if let's say the house had mold, seller knew about it, they didn't tell me about it, I didn't discover it, I cannot be sued later for not disclosing that information. I never had it in the first place. Paragraph 8 is going to talk about your authorization once the seller has hired you. What can you do for this seller? So paragraph 8A, you get to put a sale sign in the yard. This is your permission to put your sign there. Now, if you see any other signs, let's say you're taking an expired listing and the previous real estate agent has failed to pick up their sign, you can remove it. So, or if you're taking a for sale by owner and they have a for sale by owner sign out in the yard, you can also remove it. Paragraph B, this is your authority to advertise the property in any way that you see fit. Now, hopefully at this point, you've talked to the seller about what your marketing plan looks like. So, but you may have a set marketing plan and at the last minute you go, oh, I think I'm going to do fill in the blank for advertising. It is your sole judgment and discretion about how you're actually going to market that property. That's completely up to you. That's what makes all of us different. Everybody does it a little bit differently, but the seller needs to understand that you will be taking photographs and putting them on the internet. Now, if you're taking a property that is occupied by tenants, you do need to have their permission to photograph the interior of the property with their physical things there. It's just a good idea since you don't have problems with that later. Paragraph 8C, the seller needs to understand it is their responsibility to turn on all the utilities and leave them on through the date of closing. That's going to assist with the buyers doing their home inspections. So check with the seller. Sometimes some obvious things that we don't look for, gas. Is the gas on? Especially if the property is going to be vacant. Sometimes they'll turn things off trying to save money. They need to make sure that those are on. Paragraph D is a little bit confusing.
I'm sorry, when you say on, does that mean like not obviously not physically on, but like the services are still connected?
Correct. On and servicing the property. Like if I need to check to see if the water is hot, that hot water tank is gas. The gas needs to be on so that I can check that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. No, not physically like running water. Just make sure that the water is on.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. Paragraph D. In a nutshell, the seller of that property, if they have a mortgage on it, they are going to be providing to you. If they're not comfortable providing it to you, they can send the information directly to the title company. but they need to give you information pertaining to the mortgage on the property. So sometimes sellers get a little bit weird about giving you that information because it requires them to give you their social security number. So if they have a problem with that, put them into direct contact with the title company. The title company will need their social security number and the account number and the name of the lender who holds the mortgage so that they can order payoff prior to closing. Paragraph E, seller is going to give you a key to the property so that you can show the property. So which is carrying out the objectives of getting it sold. Now, if your property is occupied, paragraph F really is going to come into play. The seller has got to give you permission to access the property for the purpose of showing it, but it needs to be at a reasonable hour. So have a conversation with your seller. What is too early for you to show the property? What is too late for you to show the property? And you can actually block that time off in the Showing Time app so that appointments can't be made within certain hours. So if they have littles at home and they've got maybe a baby that goes to bed early, 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, that might be too late for them. But you can always block out those showings and then you don't have to worry about people trying to request. Okay, paragraph G, here is the authorization for you to accept documents on their behalf. Now, as a representative of the buyer in the future, when someone sends an offer to you, it's as if they sent it to the seller themselves. Now, that becomes super important when we get into things like repair list, because there's a time frame on how long the sellers have to get estimates. Okay, so delivery to you, don't wait 2 or 3 days to send it over to the seller because those days are counting. Now, paragraph 9 are your broker duties and responsibilities. If you've sat through any of my purchase contracts, we have a separate page that we typically fill out explaining to buyers what our broker duties and responsibilities to sellers and buyers are. It's a whole separate sheet. We don't need that separate sheet when we do a listing agreement because it's incorporated in this document. So let's talk about what your duties and responsibilities are. Very number one thing, this is why it's number one, you gotta treat all parties with honesty and exercise reasonable skill and care. What does that mean? So if you cannot exercise reasonable skill and care when you're explaining a contract to a seller that you don't know. So if you're not familiar with the purchase contracts, you need to get familiar with the purchase contracts because they're relying on your expertise in order to explain it to them. Your job is to explain the pros and cons of offers. Make sure you can do that. You also need to stay within the scope of your expertise. The biggest mistake that I see people do, they have been working in residential sales. They have never attended one training event on a commercial property, and all of a sudden they want to try and list a commercial property or work with a buyer on commercial purchases. They know nothing. That is not exercising reasonable skill and care. So even though your license covers multiple areas, residential sales, commercial sales, property management, if you don't have knowledge in those areas, refer it out because you are a liability. Okay, soapbox moment, sorry. Go to number 2. Now, if someone asks you to write an offer, unless they specifically waive it in writing, you are to receive all offers and then you are to reduce the offers or counter offers into written form upon request. So, and then letter C is the most important thing. If you're listing this property, you need to present timely all written offers and counter offers. Now notice there's no time frame around that. It doesn't say within 24 hours or within 2 hours. It just says present timely. So you have an opportunity to get with the seller and set up a time. So occasionally you may not be able to reach your seller because it's Murphy's Law that the property will always receive a contract as soon as your clients leave the country. It happens every time. I can't get hold of my seller because they're on a cruise boat in the middle of the Atlantic. So, obviously present the offers as soon as you can reach them. And then number 3, timely account for all money and property received by the broker. So what is timely accounting for money? We as a brokerage do not receive property. So we don't take watches, rings, cattle, horses, chickens, nothing of value, but we do take money because we have an escrow account. If a agent or a potential buyer gives earnest money to you, you have 3 business days to get that deposited into the escrow account of the office. If the contract says that it will be held here at our office, if the contract says that that earnest money is going to be held somewhere else, like a title company, you're responsible for making sure that it actually gets there. So double check on those things. Number 4 is pretty self-explanatory. Keep confidential information confidential for the party that you represent. So let's go down to paragraph 4A. What's considered confidential information? 1, that the party's willing to pay more or accept less than being offered. I don't care if your seller said, oh, wow, we're listing the property for $150,000, but hey, if anybody brings me an offer for $140,000, we are done. I'm so accepting that. You cannot share that information. If anybody asks, what's the seller willing to accept? It's the list price of $150,000. Anything else, put it in writing. We'll see what they say. You cannot disclose that they are willing to agree to any other finance terms. So if the seller may have mentioned, hey, I'd be willing to owner carry, but I don't want to do that in the beginning. Let's see if we get a regular offer. You can't disclose that they would be willing to owner carry without written permission from the seller. And then don't give away motivating factors. So buyers are always going to ask, why are the sellers selling? I don't know why they ask that question, but they do. So your standard answer is, I'm not really sure. I suspect it's a life change. What are life changes? So they're getting married, they're getting divorced. The kids are moving in, the kids are moving out. I got a new job, I lost a job. So life changes happen. Sometimes people just get tired of their house. So, or they want something different. So life change is your standard answer on that. The 5th thing that you're agreeing to as a real estate agent, it said, this is a little misleading, disclose information pertaining to the property as required by the Disclosure Act. What does that mean? Defects. Disclose any defects that you as a real estate agent know about the property. And then number 6, follow all the rules and regulations of the Real Estate Commission, and you're good to go. Now, you owe those duties to every single person, but to the seller who you're signing this listing agreement, you owe them 2 additional duties on top of that. So you have to inform them that they will be expected to pay certain closing costs. So this is where that seller net sheet's going to come into play. So it's not unusual for sellers to only think about the real estate commission. They don't understand that the title company does not work for free. So you need to make sure that you know what costs are associated with that. And then just keep them informed of what's going on with the transaction. So in the event that you represent both parties in the transaction, you're going to need a confirmation and acknowledgement page signed by seller and buyer saying that they both understand that you represent, or you and another real estate agent represent the same brokerage. Okay, let's move down to 10. 10 just says that the seller is not going to be liable for you as the real estate agent or broker when you make promises that they don't want to uphold. So if you have somebody at an open house and they say, will the sellers leave all the flat screen TVs? And you say, make a full price offer to guarantee they will. Seller's not obligated to do that just because you made that promise. Okay, so paragraph 11 just says that you're a real estate agent and you're going to be putting forth your best efforts to sell this property, but you are not in charge of maintaining this property. Yard needs mowed, that's not you. If they need to meet a plumber over there, that's not you. So unless you want that to be you, that needs to be a decision so that you need to have a conversation around the seller with. You're not repairing things, you're not maintaining it. That's completely on the seller. Your job is to market it and get it sold. Their job is to upkeep it. Occasionally, you're going to have the seller enter into a contract with a buyer and it's not going to work out. For some reason, they fall apart. There's multiple reasons that that could happen. But what if they have entered into a contract with a buyer and the buyer is in breach of the contract? There is potentially going to be some forfeited earnest money there. Paragraph 12 just states that in the event there is forfeited earnest money, the real estate agent has the ability to collect half of it. So let's say that the buyer put $1,000 worth of earnest money down, and a couple of days before closing, the buyer backs out of the contract and loses their earnest money, and it goes to the seller. So that $1,000 could be split 50-50 if you choose between you and the owner of the property because you have done work. If you do accept any forfeited earnest money and then you turn around and resell that property again in the future, there is no reduction in the commission that the seller has agreed to pay to you on the second offer. So you would essentially be earning your full commission and this forfeited earnest money. All right. So again, I've said that we mentioned the word broker. We use the word broker a lot in real estate, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're the managing broker. Broker means anybody who is facilitating a transaction, and that's going to be you. So your signature, so at the bottom of this, when it says broker, will include sales associates whose signatures appear on this agreement. So this is why you do not need to bring this document to me in order to have me physically sign it, because you have permission to do that. Paragraph 15 is important. Sellers and brokers are getting into a legally binding contract with each other to perform a service, which is to get the property sold. This agreement cannot be canceled by just one of you. It needs to be canceled. If you choose to cancel it or terminate it, it has to be with mutual consent from both of you. So consider yourself married until the expiration of this contract, and then they can do whatever. All right, paragraph 16, my line's in the wrong place. It should be underneath that. But you are going to be required to give the buyer a copy of everything that they sign. So when they sign this agreement, you can either physically give them a copy at your meeting, or you can go back to your office, drop it through the scanner, and email it to them. Either way, that constitutes delivery. Now, we're all members of the MLS. So part of our obligation as members of the MLS is that every listing that we take must be entered into the MLS. So sellers need to understand that, and that's outlined in paragraph 17. So all initial information, when we take that listing agreement and those disclosures, are going to be loaded into the MLS. Excuse me. Now, our rules and regulations say 24 hours after you take this listing, but we're going to talk about that. So you're going to upload information into the MLS. Any price reductions will be noted on there. Any closing information, including closing costs that may be paid by the seller, will also be included on the MLS. That's an all-encompassing data. And then most important is paragraph 18. So we're in a market where you may be getting offers continuously on your listings. So keep in mind, once the seller physically signs a contract with another buyer, they have accepted an offer. It doesn't matter if you get 20 offers. Once that signature is on that paper and you've notified the buyer that they have accepted the offer, there is no duty to you as a real estate agent to show them other offers. And why would you? You're just going to muddy the waters. They couldn't accept another offer if they wanted to because they are in contract with another buyer. So just don't. When we get down to paragraph 19, I do want you to take a pause on paragraph 19 when you're explaining this to the sellers, because this is all going to deal with the lockbox that you're going to place on the property. Now, if you look about midway through this paragraph, it says seller acknowledges that said broker has recommended that all valuables such as coins, jewelry, furs, silver, guns, cameras, paintings, antiques, and the like be removed from the property for safekeeping during the listing period. So you're not always going to be able to guarantee that people couldn't pick things up and walk off with those. So all valuables need to be put away. Now, I do want to address, because this contract does not, we need to address the legalization of medical marijuana. So if your seller has plants that they are growing, because they are legally able to do that, they need to put them into either a locked closet or a locked room. All rooms do not have to be accessible for potential buyers. The only time that room would need to be accessible is when a contract is placed on that property and the buyer needs to do an inspection of the property. But other than that, they can keep it locked. So check mark, yes or no. Do you have authorization to put a lockbox on that property? Now, keep in mind that if the property has a tenant, you need to make sure that you have the tenant's permission to put the lockbox on the property. It's not the seller's decision, it's the tenant's decision. That can make it a little bit difficult sometimes when you're showing properties, but it is what it is. Okay, paragraph 20. Now, we're going to talk about whether we should disclose to other real estate agents that we're getting other offers. Are there other offers on that property? Because at this point in the market, you should be calling to ask. So probably going to be other offers on the property. Now, pros and cons of that. If I disclose to other real estate agents that I have offers, essentially, we think that may drive the price up because buyers understand that they're competing. That's a pro. But a con of that was that you may go back to a buyer and say, oh gosh, they have multiple offers on the property. And the buyer may say, I'm not going to make an offer. I don't want to compete with someone else. And at that point, the seller loses out on a potential offer because he disclosed. So talk to the seller about which one they prefer, what scenario they prefer, and then check mark the appropriate box. Paragraph 21 is a little bit confusing, so I'm going to paraphrase this. This paragraph is telling the seller that you're going to be utilizing the services of a title escrow company, and that the title escrow company is going to be charging them fees in order to do the abstracting, paperwork, things like that. So in the way that this
Hello? Did I lose you?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I kind of got you. You say something again?
Okay, so
Okay.
can you hear me? All right. So unfortunately, I think we had a glitch with our internet. So hopefully, did everyone hear paragraph 21 on the fact that it just needs to say CNET sheet?
I did.
Okay, so paragraph 21, the way that they have written this paragraph, they want the seller to understand that the title company is going to charge them fees, and they want to separate that out from the commission. I find that sellers don't understand paragraph 21. So on the blank, I don't like to say, okay, title company is going to charge you these fees. I'm going to charge you these fees. I like to write C net sheet on here so that the seller just needs to go to one location to look at all of the selling costs associated with that.
Oh,
Okay, so just write in C net sheet and that covers everything.
cool.
On paragraph 22, it talks about a residential service agreement. A residential service agreement, I don't know why they don't make it simple, but that's simply a home warranty. Now, home warranties can vary depending on the cost of them, anywhere from $400 to $800, depending on what you're covering. So a simple home warranty could be $400. If you're covering a pool or well, septic, and you're adding things on, it gets a little bit more expensive. Now, do they want to purchase one of these for a potential buyer? So the seller will not pay for that home warranty until the time of close. And then from the day of closing, it will cover a buyer for the first year. Kind of gives buyers a little bit of peace of mind to their property. It's like buying a car with a warranty. So they need to check mark whether they want to order one or if they do not want to order one. If they check mark that they do want to purchase a home warranty, that is going to be your job to make sure that that home warranty gets ordered. Nobody's going to know to order it except for you. So make sure you're doing that. And then paragraph 23, the seller has been notified. Have they been notified that the property is in a flood hazard area? So you need to ask that question. If they haven't received any notice, then simply just check no and move on. Now, paragraph
did we not, did you stop sharing the?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm yapping.
No, it's okay. I thought we were done with it. Then you went on down. So
no. When it kicked it, the internet, when it kicked it off and came back, I forgot it stopped sharing on here. So, okay. So paragraph 21, C net sheet. And then paragraph 22, this is the home warranty, right in the cost of the potential warranty. And then you're just going to check mark whether they want one or they do not want one. And then paragraph 23, if they have been notified that the property is now in a flood hazard area, you're going to check mark yes or no. Yes, they've been notified, or no, they have not. Now, paragraph 24 is blank. So there's an opportunity for you to write some things in here, and it will depend on the situation of whether you need to write things in. So now, excuse me. You have 24 hours to get a property on the MLS from the list date. So now we said we wanted to put the list date as today. We go on the listing appointment today, but we get there and they've got 2 weeks worth of work that needs to be done to the property. How do we get around the MLS regulations of 24 hours? You're going to put this paragraph in your listing. Listing to go active on the MLS on or before, and you write a date in here. So if it's going to take them 2 weeks to get something painted or cleaned up, just put the future date here. But on paragraph 2, you started your listing agreement today. Now, occasionally you may be reserving buyers. So with a, that's okay. So with a buyer, what a reserved buyer is sometimes when you go on listing appointments, the seller may say, well, I really want to list with you, but so-and-so has contacted me. I want to see if they want to buy the property before I actually enter into a listing agreement with you. No problem. How about we sign our listing agreement today? We'll put so-and-so on the contract. If that person actually does buy this property, then you would not owe real estate commission. But you want to make sure that you're doing that for a limited amount of time. I would say no more than 2 weeks from today through 2 weeks. That gives that seller or that buyer, potential buyer, plenty of opportunity to get into the lender and get things squared away. You don't want to leave that open-ended, because if you put a lot of money into listing this property and then that particular buyer does come back months later and purchases the property, you don't get paid. So make sure that you're limiting that. And then the next thing that you see is possible scenarios for this area. Seller is going to reserve things. If they want to reserve that Ring doorbell, or they want to reserve the trampoline, or they want to reserve the hot tub, whatever it is that they're reserving, brackets for the flat screen TV, you need to put it here. So now, not only are you going to put reserved items here, they also need to appear on the MLS agreement, or on the MLS for the public. So seller is reserving flat screen TV brackets and hot tub, whatever it is, public knowledge. You're going to have your brokerage here. You're going to sign here. Seller signs. You're good to go. Okay. Now that completes the 4 pages of the actual listing agreement. Do I have any questions so far?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So again, you're going to need to do a net sheet for them. I do want to show you this document. This is called a licensee disclosure. Because disclosures are such a big deal, if you are going on a listing appointment and you know that there is a defect with the property and the seller did not disclose that on their disclosures, you are obligated to disclose that for them. So this is the document that you're going to fill out, location of the subject property, you're going to put the address, and then down here in the blank part, you're going to fill in whatever the defect is. Okay, house had piers, house has a leak in the basement, whatever it may be. Now you'll notice at the bottom, you sign it, you date it, you tell me what company you work for, buyers sign it, no seller signature. So you do not need to have the sellers sign this document saying that they're aware you're disclosing it. That is not necessary. So technically, when you disclose defects, you're protecting them. So it's in their best interest that you disclose anything that they might have forgotten. And then I want to go back to the condo association. In the event that you take a condo listing, and I mentioned the fact that this would be an additional piece of paper. So condo agreements, we're going to check mark that we're taking an exclusive right to sell, but you'll notice it just talks about what are some things that come with this condo. So on paragraph 2, parking areas assigned to the unit, and you'll just list the number or the location of the parking units here. And then what are some common expenses that when you pay the condo fees every month, where does that money go to? Do they cover the water, the sewer, the trash? Just check mark all that apply there. And then in paragraph 5, those are some special provisions. There are some condos who have a first right of refusal in their covenants, codes, and restrictions, which just means when you list the property, let's say I'll list the condo for $100,000 and I have a buyer that comes and wants to pay $100,000. I have to offer that property at that price to all of the other owners in the complex. If no one in the complex wants to match that price, then the buyer contract can go through. But I have to give the other owners the first right of refusal. And then your seller signs it, and that's just part of it. Okay. All right. So that concludes our listing contract training class for today. Sorry about the little glitch in internet, but does anybody have any questions?
No worries. Really do appreciate it. I didn't know that. That's new information to me about the condos, about giving the other tenants the first right of refusal.
Yeah, some have that, some don't. If you're going on a listing with a listing appointment for a condo, you might want to ask the seller, if they're not sure, ask for a copy of their covenants, codes, and restrictions so that you can look at that and make sure that's not going to be an issue.
Good.
Okay, well, you guys have a fantastic day and call me if you need anything.